No slow lanes. Do not lock knowledge in chains. Do not take our rights away. To connect, communicate. No slow lanes. Do not kill our innovation. Do not let money decide our access to information. No slow lanes.
Welcome to Zine Your Research, the podcast series, where we're talking about zines in academia. I'm Catherine Hicks, an Arts and Humanities librarian at Tulane University. Today, I'm talking to Kim Wheeler, a Science and Engineering librarian at Tulane, and Alanna Frick, an Ecology and Evolutionary Biology PhD student, about scientific communication. So welcome. Can you tell me a little bit more about yourselves and what brings you here?
So hi everyone, I'm Kim, and I've been a science librarian for about 3 years now, and working in academic libraries. But in my previous life, I was a writing instructor and did a lot of work with undergraduate students, primarily in research writing. So I feel like this discussion about scholarly communications is kind of a perfect way to bring my experiences together to talk about how scientists and researchers can communicate what they are studying, what they are learning, communicate their research, and kind of bring it into the world of libraries and publications.
And I'm Alanna. So I have a lot of experience with science communication. I started out being a formal educator for a while, and then moved to informal education, where I worked at Audubon Zoo in the education department over there. And over the course of COVID, decided, you know what? I think I want to go back to school. So that's what I did, and I'd always wanted to pursue my PhD. So here I am. I am a PhD student in the Gunderson Lab in the Ecology and Evolutionary Biology department here at Tulane.
Beautiful. So I'd like to start, for people that are maybe less familiar with the topic, with what do either of y'all see as one of the biggest, if not the biggest, challenges in scientific communication?
Biggest challenge. I definitely think the biggest challenge for me, kind of like on the research side of things, is getting the word out there without feeling like you are less than as a scientist. I am somebody who comes from, again, an informal educational background. I worked with 4-year-olds to 104-year-olds, right? So like, I'm able to adjust how I communicate to my audience. And I have learned through that experience that in order to educate the public, you have to be super accessible. However, that can be perceived as less academic, less straight-laced. So I think that for me is kind of the biggest, is how do I balance being taken seriously as a scientist while also making my research accessible to everyone, because my research is very important. It's very important to me. I think it's very important to the world of science. And if nobody is able to understand it, then what purpose does it serve?
Yeah, and I think today especially, it is so important for the scientific community to gain the trust of the public. Obviously, distrust in science is such a huge issue. And at least some of that comes from a tendency of scientists, maybe especially in the past, to not know how to communicate with the public. They're used to communicating with other scientists in their discipline, and for using very discipline-specific jargon, and not, as you were saying, reworking how they communicate their research depending on the audience. And so I think today we really have to get serious in the scientific community about how we take our research and communicate it to begin winning that trust from the public.
Yeah, and not only that, so what honestly brought me to science eventually, it took me a while to find it. I'm 34 years old, and I found it later in life. So growing up, I've got my PBS tote bag over there. I was a PBS kid, and Bill Nye the Science Guy is who made science accessible to me, right? I saw Bill Nye, and I was like, look at all the cool science he is doing, and that would be awesome to do when I grow up. Well, you get through school, math starts to get hard, parts of the sciences that, you're like, oh yeah, this will be fun. Physics. You get into physics and you're like, oh, okay, maybe not. And you start to kind of like draw yourself back from it. And it's because it starts to feel stuffy and it starts to feel like something out of your reach. Especially too, for me, I'm a woman who grew up in the South. I didn't have a lot of female representation. I didn't have a lot of scientific representation to begin with growing up. So it wasn't until I started meeting scientists in the real world as an adult that I realized, oh wait, I can be a scientist. That's something that, that little Bill Nye spark kind of came back to me. And it's something that I realized if I buckle down and do it, I could also be a scientist. I don't have to know all of the math. I just have to know some math, right? I don't have to know all of the physics. I'm going into biology. I just need to know the biological aspects. So yeah, I think that's also, representation is another big hurdle to kind of get over as well.
Yeah, I agree. I love Bill Nye. I'm also a 90s kid.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your research specifically and how in your research you are trying to do these balances between authority, coming across as an authoritative expert, but also connecting that research to something that is actually human, something that actually connects to people on an emotional level?
Yeah, for sure. So I will start with my research. So I am in the Gunderson lab here at Tulane, and I study basically lead tolerance in a specific kind of lizard called the anole. We have two anole species here in Louisiana. We've got the brown anole, which is an invasive species, and then we have the native green anole species. Now, we found out last year, kind of sort of by accident, that the brown anole population of anoles here in New Orleans can tolerate just insane levels of lead. More than any other vertebrate species known to man. We have levels that far exceeded even our expectations. And so my current research, my current work that I'm working on is seeing what that looks like in our green anole population. But overall, the goal of my research is to kind of look at the evolutionary impacts that humans have on the organisms around them. Lead is something that has been prevalent in cities since the dawn of most cities. So it's definitely, the urban lead burden is something that is an issue not only for humans, but for wildlife as well. But when you find something like insane levels of tolerance, so not only did we find that they had these really high levels of lead, we dosed them, so they had extra high levels of lead, but then they performed just fine, if not better, on some of the performance tests that we gave them. So looking at that tolerance and the evolution behind that and seeing, okay, how could we apply this to other systems, I think is really important.
So when you are communicating this research to both people maybe within your department, but also people who have no idea what any of this is, how do you balance sounding like an expert, sounding like you know what you're talking about, with making it interesting, or more importantly, perhaps connecting it to something human or emotional, making it something that people will care about and think about?
So I think I start by being silly and super accessible. I used to, before this, I was a tutor, I was a nanny for a while, and my kids always said that I was just weird. But it was like a good kind of weird, right? And so I always taught them to embrace being weird. So I study lizards. A lot of people think that lizards are weird. If you want to, get a conversation going at a party, ask if anybody knows how to catch a lizard in an urban setting. Spoiler alert, it's with a fishing pole that has a little loop on the end. Ooh. Right? So I have your interest piqued. And I start telling you then the question is, well, wait, why are you catching lizards? And so then I get to talk about, why I'm doing my research. It's something that I feel you have to start. It's similar to writing a book or reading a book. You want your hook. You need something that is accessible and like approachable to people. They see the lizards running around, right? And when I was doing field work a couple of weeks ago, they would see me and they'd be like, oh, it's the lizard lady, right? Like they can spot me from a mile away with my fishing pole out there. And they come up to me and they ask questions, and trying to be, as accessible as I can is really important. But yeah, I like to just kind of get them hooked in. And then once I have my captive audience, I'll go on and on and on about my research. So
I love that. I love a lizard.
Who doesn't?
Lizards. They're so cute.
They're so cute.
They are very
so cute. Little faces.
So I'd also like to talk about the publishing side of science. I know, Alanna, you've probably not published any of this yet. But there are also issues in the realm of scientific publishing. We're talking about going into the community and talking about the lizards with the people that live in that community. But when we're talking about then communicating the findings of that research back to people in these communities, how does that work? How does that happen? Kim, maybe you can speak more to these challenges of scientific publishing.
Yes, that comes back to the problem of, I think, the distrust in science. So much of it is connected to the astronomical cost of scholarly communications and in the publishing industry. So, now for a library to subscribe to Nature or another top scientific journal costs tens of thousands of dollars. Yet, for the needs of our researchers, we need thousands and thousands of journals. So the cost is so huge, but it means there's complete inequality based on income. So you have to go to a relatively wealthy institution to have access to these research publications. And so, I think people have caught on that, they've been paying tax dollars that are going towards the funding of research, yet the everyday person does not have access to the research product. They don't know what the results of the research are. And so, I think the everyday person often walks away thinking, oh, this money is just being wasted. We're just paying for, these people in their ivory tower to study things that have no relevance to our lives. So I think it's our job to find ways to take that research and make it accessible to the everyday person, both in terms of access to the publications, in terms of distribution, but also in terms of the way we communicate it. So it's like we have to find a way to distribute research, information about research, but it also has to be done in a way that it's accessible. So of course the highly technical jargon that sometimes is necessary for publication in an academic journal needs to be rewritten for the public. And so that's why it's so important for us to think about alternative ways of communicating science to the broader community. And zines, of course, are a perfect way for that to happen.
Yes, of course, because Alanna, one of the reasons we wanted to talk to you so badly today is you are in the process of making a zine several zines out of your research. Yes. I'd love to start with asking you what is a zine? What is your personal definition of a zine?
Yeah, so I think my current working definition of what a zine is that it is an uninhibited educational art pamphlet. So it's uninhibited in that one of the things that I love most about a zine is that there are no rules, right? I can do whatever, I can put whatever on there. Obviously, if I want to reach certain audiences, I need to, kind of mold that to fit, but it's uninhibited. They're also educational. You can write a zine about just about anything. I have a very large collection of zines on a number of different subjects, as well as just like some zines that are just, kind of educating you on everyday life in the form of a comic or an art piece, some collage, something like that. And then, that's also the art, right? Art should have no rules. That's something that it took me a little while to learn as an adult. And I like to say that I'm a recovering perfectionist. So I think that's something else that's really nice about zines, is that you can just kind of unleash your creativity. And yeah, they're pamphlets. So they're easy, you can print them off on one sheet of paper, which is really cool and accessible. You can also, print out a larger, copy and staple them up and get them in your local comic book store or, what have you. But yeah, so they're a wealth of different beautiful things all joined together into one really cool medium. So that is what a zine is to me.
So what is it, I mean, we maybe can infer from your definition, but what is it about a zine that draws you to it in terms of your research specifically? Why publish your research as a zine, perhaps in addition or instead of in a traditional form?
Yeah, accessibility. First and foremost, accessibility. I was also a library kid growing up, and one day when I finally put the finishing touches on some of my zines, I've also inspired some of my colleagues to do the same. That's one thing that I would love to do, is bring those into local libraries, bring them into schools. One project that I did recently, we were in my graduate department within the grad students. We were in Chewbacca's this year, and we
for those not perhaps
yes.
in New Orleans, can you explain what Chewbacca's is?
Yeah, so Chewbacca's is a parade during Mardi Gras, and it's basically just this really cool, nerdy celebration where it's just kind of put on by nerds in the community, honestly, and you join in, and as long as you have sort of like a sci-fi, fantasy, kind of nerdy theme, you can run with it and get to be in this parade. So we decided to do a velvet worm. This is your, moment to stop. Google what a velvet worm is. It's super cool. I will also provide the velvet worm zine. But a lot of people don't know what a velvet worm is. And so I was like, you know what? This is a perfect educational opportunity. So I made a real quick, tiny little one-page zine that you fold up. And I was that was our Mardi Gras throw, or our Chewbacca's throw, was to hand out this zine. And we were just this crazy looking worm walking down the street, handing out little pamphlets about what exactly it was that we were, because nobody really got it.
I think this is so great for, ecology and evolutionary biology students to be involved in creating throws. So, of course, for those of you who aren't familiar with Mardi Gras, usually during the parades, the different crews of marchers are throwing either, a lot of times it's plastic beads, or it's other things that are not sustainable for the environment. So I think it's so fantastic that the EE Bio students were actually throwing informational mini zines that were on paper. So,
Recycled paper.
So that is so fantastic.
Yes.
So to bring our conversation back maybe a little bit to scientific communication, can you tell us a little bit about how you go about translating what could, in some cases, be really dense scientific research into a zine? What do you decide to keep in? What do you take out? How do you judge what your audience is going to want to read?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So from also to having a background in early childhood education, so my theory is if you can teach a 4-year-old something, you can teach just about anything, right? It's a very accessible level to be on. And honestly, when I'm learning something outside of my realm of understanding, if I'm learning something new, my first question is, I'm sorry, can you tell me that I'm 5? Because I have no clue what you're talking about. And I think that's okay. And I think we kind of need to remove the stigma of not knowing things. It's not... you can definitely talk to somebody, talk down to people, but I think if you just speak to people like you would, somebody who has zero understanding, explaining it to an alien, right? That's how I kind of narrow down that process. So I take something as complicated as, heavy metal tolerance, which has all of these different mechanisms. And don't worry, I do also have very detailed designs that will probably never be finished, and that's okay. But I pare all of that down into our bodies are able to take something that is toxic and get rid of it, or take something that is toxic and make it safer for our bodies, right? So just taking very, very complex things and boiling them down to if I had only so many characters to type out, right, what would I say about this? So that's definitely part of my process. I also think too that in when I go through making a zine, I storyboard them. And honestly, I found that it helps me with my research. Mm-hmm. It helps me, especially when it comes time to doing the writing part of my research. I have that story already kind of created. I have it storyboarded. I've got, okay, what were the big main points that I had to grab and squeeze onto one page and pictures? What was that? Okay, now let me translate that into academic writing. So being able, I think, too, to kind of flux back and forth between the two is a skill that I've started developing and really appreciate.
Yeah, I think that comes back to what Kim was saying earlier about understanding audience and understanding that you will have different audiences for your research, and there may be a time and place for a very dense, very jargon heavy, very traditional research paper when you are writing for other researchers who need to have a really thorough understanding of your research process so that it can go through the sort of very rigorous academic processes of being checked and rechecked to make sure that it is viable information. But on the other hand, understanding that is one very specific audience and that your research doesn't just have to live in that space. Right. Your research can connect to people emotionally. It can connect to people on a human level if you think about your research in maybe a slightly different way.
Yeah, two things can be true at the same time, right? That's one big thing that I've started to really accept as an adult is that, you can have both. You can be a really well, developed scientist with great methods, excellent writing ability, all these wonderful things that make you a quote-unquote great scientist, but then you can also be really good at communicating that information, and that's done by just being simple with it, taking it back to why you started the project, why you're researching what it is you're researching, what did your research tell you, just those big key takeaways, I think is all people really need.
I think what Alanna had said earlier about not talking down, but learning how to adjust how you cover your research according to the audience. And I've seen these well done scientific zines that balance that very well. So one pops in my head right now called Nicotine, written by a neuroscience scientist based on their dissertation research. And with the use of words and illustrations, they were able to kind of give this really broad look at nicotine and the effect of nicotine on our body and specifically on our brain. But they didn't just stop there. They then had some pages in their zine that actually went into the molecular, structure of nicotine and other contaminants. And so one reader can find it all there and choose what they want to take in. They can stop at just more the broad strokes, the summary, or if they want to, they can dive into some of the deeper, more meticulous illustrations. So that's one of the beauties of zines.
And who doesn't love to feel smart, right?
Yes.
Who doesn't love to, well, today I learned about, the neural pathways that are affected by nicotine.
Yes.
Right?
And I think that this is also a very important line to walk as scientific communicators, that on the one hand, talking down to someone can feel like you're using really specific jargon and making someone feel stupid, but on the other end of that spectrum is completely stripping out any sort of scientific process to dumb it down in a way that you're sort of acting like they're a child and they can't understand something. So walking this thin line where you are understanding that your audience is smart, even though they are not classically trained in the sciences or any sort of thing like that. I think that this is it's particularly an issue now. I think a lot of the scientific misinformation that gets spread specifically because the sort of flim-flam people are really good at making their audiences feel like they are smarter than experts. And I think zines can be a really thoughtful way of walking that line of understanding that your audience is smart and can understand this, they just don't feel connected to it in a human way. So you humanize it, you come to people where they are. I think the Chewbacca's parade is a great example of it's a mix of people, right? There are some children that go to that parade, but it is largely adults that are at that parade. So you're in a very mixed audience. You're not just writing for children, you're also writing for people who are like living in these communities. And I think when we talk about distribution in publishing as well, this massive wealth inequality that is a particular problem in the sciences, though is a problem in just about any form of academic publishing. But we're also talking about like getting these things to where people are, and that takes fundamentally understanding your community, understanding where they gather, understanding that there's going to be a lot of people at this parade, and this the throw is so a part of Mardi Gras culture. So it is about understanding your community and adjusting the way that you talk about your research in a way that is going to actually connect to the people in the community that are affected by your research. As a last question here at the end, I'd like to know how you got started in zines. If people have been listening to this episode and are now like, I'm going to turn my research into a zine, please do. Please do.
Do it.
How do you get started? What do you do?
Yeah, so it's funny. I had collected zines for a really long time. My husband and I, we like to travel, and whenever we'd go places, he's a big comic book collector, so we'd always stop into the comic book store, and we just kind of started, this really cool collection of zines from wherever we would travel, as well as the ones from home, and coffee shops around New Orleans that we would pick up. So it kind of started by me just collecting zines and being like, these are really cool. What an interesting way to, teach somebody about something. What a cool way to like present your work. And then I, started at Tulane, and it was my first year. And your first year of grad school is a little overwhelming. And by a little, I mean a lot. And so I had decided that I needed a little bit of a break, and I noticed that there was a workshop at the library on zines and doing a zine for your research. It was called Zine Your Research. So I took the workshop, absolutely fell in love with it, and it like kicked it off for me right there. Like I had always... It was the bridge that I needed to tell me, okay, I can make a zine. It doesn't have to be published in a comic book store, but I can make one and I can disseminate information. And, science communication has always spoken very deeply to my heart. So it's something that I was like, absolutely, like this is the way that I can. This is a very accessible form that I can, kind of take and run with. And so that's kind of what I did. And honestly, my process for like making a zine in general, I alluded to storyboarding earlier, but really all I do is I'll either sketch it out on a piece of paper. I do like to kind of restrict myself in size because I think it comes back to, putting what is essential on the page, because I think that's the whole purpose for me behind why I create zines. So, I start with a piece of paper, or I start on my iPad, and I just kind of start brain dumping words, and then, general layout of how many pages, what kind of story I want to tell. And then I slowly start replacing the words with pictures, or maybe I sit down and really like sit with and draw out, one big word, something like that, just to kind of draw attention. And and then by the end of it, you've got a zine. So you print it off and hand it out. It's just that simple.
Beautiful. So can either of y'all think of great examples of classic science zines that we can link in the show notes that people can go look at right now to get inspiration and get started on?
Definitely want to check out the Small Science Collective, and we'll link that. It's a great website where they offer just multiple small one-page folded zines that you can just print out yourself and distribute freely about a wide range of scientific topics. So I love that one as a starting point for people who are beginning to explore scientific zines. And then there's some great examples out there of more long-form zines, where people have created multiple page zines to cover, either their dissertation topic or their research topic. So we'll definitely link some cool ones, including the nicotine one, which is a great one.
Mm-hmm. Are we going to be getting links to Alanna's zines?
Absolutely. I'll get them all up there for y'all. I have quite a few. You can learn about velvet worms. You can learn about anoles. I actually started and now will finish a zine about zining your research. It's one that I really want to perfect, but I need to just finish it up and get it out. And it can be, that's the other beauty of a zine. It can be this ever morphing. This is the first edition. Now here's the second and the third and the fourth, right? So, I will absolutely share all of this.
Excellent.
Sharing my research.
So, yes, go check those out in the show notes linked below, and then go make a zine of your research.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you all for listening.
Slow lanes, do not lock knowledge in chains, do not take our rights away, to connect, communicate, no slow lanes, do not kill our innovation, do not let money decide our access to information, no slow lanes, no slow lanes, no. There is a fight.
Today, I'm talking to Kim Wheeler, Science and Engineering Librarian at Tulane, and Alanna. Oh shit! I knew I was gonna do it. I'm sorry, and then I was like, and now I don't have any follow. I'm just talking. I don't have any follow-up questions.
And I was thinking, where can I jump in on this one?
Yeah. I'm sorry. Very cool.
Fun.
Yeah, thank y'all. You just recorded a podcast episode.
It's from my link tree.
That was great. Have you done podcasts before? That's right. You guys did this series.